Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this really comforting expectation of precision. Like
Yeah.
you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it.
Right. It's visible. You can categorize it perfectly.
Exactly. Broken or not broken, it's totally binary. But step into the world of modern business, specifically looking for this concept of the entrepreneur, and that x-ray machine just shatters. It gets incredibly murky.
Oh, yeah. Completely.
Because if I ask you, the listener, to close your eyes right now and picture an entrepreneur, a very specific, honestly aggressive image almost certainly pops into your head.
I mean, I know exactly what you're picturing.
Right. It's a 20-something guy in a gray hoodie operating out of some messy Silicon Valley garage, just, fueled by energy drinks and blind optimism,
Right.
ready to disrupt a legacy industry by next Tuesday.
It's the mythical tech bro archetype. And it dominates our cultural imagination because it's a neat, digestible narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's individual genius triumphing over the old guard.
But the problem is, when you actually pull the data, the historical records, and the behavioral psychology, which is exactly what we are doing today in this deep dive into a massive comprehensive compilation on the mechanics of entrepreneurship, you realize that that hoodie-wearing stereotype is just a statistically insignificant pixel. It's part of a wildly complex, ancient picture.
It really is.
So our mission today is to completely dismantle that modern myth. We're going to look at the genuine DNA of the founder, explore some deeply counterintuitive psychological traits, and examine how this mechanism of business manifests across different cultures.
Yeah, to find that actual DNA, we have to look past the software apps and, the venture capital headlines. The foundational economic definition actually doesn't come from Silicon Valley at all.
Right, where does it come from?
It comes from an 18th century Irish-French economist named Richard Cantillon.
Irish-French. That's a combo.
Yeah, he was a fascinating guy, and he laid down a surprisingly mechanical framework. He basically said an entrepreneur is someone who buys resources at a certain price and sells them at an uncertain price, deliberately taking on the risk of enterprise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Buys at a certain price, sells at an uncertain price. I mean, that completely strips away the glamour of being a visionary CEO.
It totally does. It isolates the core variable, which is simply navigating risk. Cantillon brilliantly separated the function of the risk-taker from the capitalist.
Meaning the capitalist is just the person who parks their money in the venture.
Exactly, the investor. But isolating the risk-taker inevitably sparked a massive philosophical debate in the 20th century regarding what these people actually do to the macroeconomic landscape.
Right.
So on one side, you have Joseph Schumpeter in the 1930s, who argued that entrepreneurs are agents of and this is a famous phrase, the gale of creative destruction.
A gale of creative destruction implies violence. Like it implies tearing something down, not just building something new.
Yeah, Schumpeter viewed it as an inherently destructive mechanism. He argued that an entrepreneur combines existing resources in a revolutionary way that actively dismantles old industries.
Okay, give me an example of that.
So his classic example was taking the existing steam engine, combining it with existing wagon-making technology, and creating the automobile.
I think.
By introducing the car, you aren't just creating a better transportation option, you are actively destroying the horse-drawn carriage industry and all the supply chains attached to it.
So Schumpeter's entrepreneur is essentially a forest fire. They violently clear out the old dead brush so a completely new ecosystem of trees can grow in its place.
Right, unnecessary destruction.
But the sources also highlight a competing theory from Israel Kirzner. And Kirzner's model seems a lot less catastrophic.
It is. Kirzner argued that the majority of entrepreneurial innovation is not a destructive gale at all. He viewed the entrepreneur as more of a stabilizing force, someone who recognizes small market inefficiencies and corrects them through incremental improvement.
So no forest fires for him.
No, not at all. Instead of inventing the automobile, Kirzner's entrepreneur notices a flaw in beverage consumption and, replaces a paper-drinking straw with a plastic one.
Or, in today's context, replaces the plastic one back with more durable paper one.
Exactly. It doesn't destroy the beverage industry. It just optimizes a tiny node in the system.
Okay, so if Schumpeter's the forest fire, Kirzner is basically remodeling a kitchen, one cabinet at a time. It's an upgrade, not a structural teardown.
That's a great way to put it.
But this raises a mechanical question about the founder themselves. Like, Does the entrepreneur have to invent the fire, or do they just need to be the one brave enough to strike the match?
Well, Schumpeter was adamant that they just have to strike the match. The innovation does not require the entrepreneur to be the actual inventor of the dramatic new technology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they simply must be the individual who perceives the potential to combine those existing resources in a novel way and, possesses the sheer will to execute it. And historical evidence actually proves societies have recognized and regulated this specific executor role for centuries.
Yeah, the historical footprints in the sources completely blew up my timeline of when business actually modernized. Like in medieval Germany, you couldn't just hang a shingle and declare yourself an entrepreneur.
No, definitely not.
You had to navigate a strict guild system, prove your competence, and earn a Meister certificate just to be legally allowed to take on that economic risk and train apprentices.
And the Ashanti Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries provides an even more fascinating structural example.
Oh, I love this part.
They developed an entire societal framework to identify and incentivize successful trade entrepreneurs. They called them abarempon, which translates roughly to big men.
Big men, yeah.
Right. And if an individual successfully navigated trade networks in a way that benefited the broader state, they were officially rewarded with an elephant tail as a heraldic badge of honor.
Which is just incredible. It proves that human societies always desperately needed a way to categorize the people willing to sit in that highly uncomfortable space between a certain cost and an uncertain payout.
Absolutely.
Because if a civilization is handing out elephant tails and Meister certificates to these individuals, we have to look at their psychological wiring. It takes a very specific and frankly bizarre kind of brain to voluntarily live in the unknown.
It really does. And understanding that wiring requires looking at the economist Frank Knight, who formalized the taxonomy of the unknown.
Okay, the taxonomy of the unknown.
Yeah, Knight separated uncertainty into 3 distinct tiers. The first tier is risk. Risk is statistically measurable. If you have a jar filled with exactly 5 red balls and 5 white balls, you know the exact mathematical probability of pulling a red one.
All right, it's 50-50. I can build a financial model or an insurance policy around that jar because the parameters are totally fixed.
Exactly. The second tier is ambiguity. This is where you know there are 5 red balls in the jar, but the total number of white balls is hidden from you.
Okay.
So the denominator is missing, making it much harder to measure, though you still grasp the basic mechanics of the game.
I mean, my anxiety spikes just thinking about that missing denominator, but at least I know I'm pulling a ball.
Right, you know the game. But then we reach the third tier, which is the natural habitat of the entrepreneur. This is true uncertainty, often called Nietzschean uncertainty.
Nietzschean uncertainty.
Yes. In this scenario, you reach into a jar and you have absolutely no idea how many objects are inside, what colors they are, or if they are even balls at all. It is entirely unquantifiable.
You are reaching blindly into a literal void.
Exactly.
So the psychological quirk we are looking for isn't just a high tolerance for risk. It's a tolerance for true unquantifiable uncertainty.
That's the distinction, yeah.
And this is where we have to bust a massive demographic myth. Because the media narrative tells us the person eagerly reaching into that third jar is a 22-year-old college dropout with 0 experience and nothing to lose.
The hoodie guy again?
Exactly. But the data from the MIT and Census Bureau study shatters that. They analyzed 2.7 million company founders who hired at least 1 employee. And the average age of a successful startup founder wasn't 22, it was 45.
Which honestly makes perfect mechanical sense when you understand Nietzschean uncertainty.
How so?
Well, navigating an unquantifiable void requires an immense reservoir of accumulated human capital. You need decades of varied managerial experience, a robust and tested social network, and a deep, granular understanding of where an industry's blind spots actually are.
You just don't have that at 20.
You simply do not possess that operational buffer when you are 19 years old.
And this perfectly explains the millennial paradox mentioned in the text. Like, millennials grew up with social media billionaires as the ultimate cultural icons, yet statistically, they're less likely to engage in entrepreneurship than prior generations.
Right, it's a huge shift.
Because the systemic barriers crushing student debt, an inaccessible housing market, complex regulatory environments, they mean young people lack the financial and social runway to survive reaching into that third jar. They can't absorb the shock of true uncertainty.
The buffer is gone. And without systemic support or accumulated capital, taking on Nietzschean uncertainty is no longer a calculated business decision. It borders on financial suicide.
But I want to push back on this whole psychological profile for a second.
Okay, sure.
We constantly hear about founders being these wildly confident, blindly trusting optimists, the whole move fast and break things
Mm,
mentality. If they're operating in a space of true uncertainty, wouldn't blind optimism just get them killed?
yes. And you've isolated one of the most counterintuitive findings in the entire source text.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to understand founder survival, researchers studied high-stakes, non-routine environments where failure is catastrophic. We're talking nuclear power plants, offshore oil rigs, surgical theaters.
High stakes, definitely.
And they found that the individuals who perform best in those environments are not the optimists. They are the inherently distrusting ones.
Wait, the people running the nuclear plants are the cynics.
They have to be. And when researchers applied this framework to entrepreneurial firms, the data mirrored the oil rigs. Firms led by distrusting entrepreneurs have significantly higher long-term survival rates than those led by optimistic or overconfident founders.
That is wild. Why does a distrusting personality translate to a more resilient business model? Like, if you distrust everyone, how do you even build a team?
It's not about being antisocial. Distrust forces hyper-alertness and the creation of verifiable systems.
Ah,
A
yeah.
distrusting entrepreneur does not discount negative signals or just assume the market will gracefully accept their product. The optimist looks at Knight's third jar and assumes it's full of gold, so they shove their hand in.
Right. Blind faith.
But the distrusting founder assumes the jar is full of scorpions. So they spend weeks engineering a pair of thick Kevlar gloves, implementing rigorous safety protocols, and building a verifiable feedback loop before they ever expose themselves to the void.
So they aren't fearless at all. They're just highly operationalizing their fear. I love that distinction.
Exactly, it's managed fear.
But if the optimal founder is a 45-year-old distrusting cynic wearing Kevlar gloves, you would assume the businesses they build are all incredibly defensive and uniform. Yet the sources show the exact opposite.
They do, yeah.
Because the psychological profile is so complex, the structures they build to solve problems are wildly diverse. We aren't just talking about venture-backed software platforms here.
No, the mechanisms of combining resources change drastically depending on the cultural and economic context. Ethnic entrepreneurship is a prime example of this.
Definitely.
Historically, immigrant populations have profoundly reshaped mainstream markets, and not out of opportunistic luxury, but out of absolute necessity.
Yeah, the examples in the text are iconic. The traditional UK fish and chips industry was pioneered in the 1860s by a Jewish immigrant named Joseph Mallon.
Right.
And the Slazenger sports brand, which has supplied tennis balls to Wimbledon since 1902, was founded by Jewish brothers Ralph and Albert Slazenger.
The mechanical innovation here is the utilization of alternative, intangible networks. When an immigrant group arrives in a new context, they are frequently locked out of traditional commercial banking and established supply chains.
They just don't have access.
So to survive, they leverage deep, high-trust community networks to secure capital, often through rotating credit associations, and mobilize labor. The business structure is built on social bonds and localized reputation rather than institutional contracts.
And the fundamental metrics for success change depending on the model, too. Look at social and feminist entrepreneurship.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
A social entrepreneur might run a high-end, highly profitable restaurant. But the math on their P&L serves a different master. They aren't maximizing profit to distribute dividends to shareholders. They are optimizing profit specifically to funnel it into housing and employment for the homeless.
The profit is a tool, not the terminal goal.
Right.
Feminist entrepreneurship operates on a similar dual-layered mandate. These founders build enterprises focused on wealth creation, but they inextricably link it to systemic social change, cooperation, equality, and mutual respect.
So the culture reflects the mission.
Exactly. The internal corporate governance often reflects those values, prioritizing flat cooperative hierarchies over traditional top-down extraction models.
So what does this all mean for how an entrepreneur structurally manages their career over a lifetime? The text categorizes founders behaviorally: novice, serial, portfolio, and project-based.
Right, the career structures.
Instead of relying on that old cliche of spinning plates, let's look at this through the lens of real estate development. A portfolio entrepreneur is like a developer managing a massive master-planned community.
That's a good analogy.
They own and operate multiple distinct businesses concurrently, and their primary skill is managing the interconnected grid of resources and capital between all those separate properties.
It requires immense delegation and systems-level thinking.
Yeah.
By contrast, a serial entrepreneur operates more like a high-end house flipper. They acquire a property, pour all their operational focus into renovating it, sell it or exit the business, and only then move entirely to the next property. They operate sequentially, not concurrently.
And the data shows that serial entrepreneurs actually have a measurably lower failure rate on their subsequent ventures. Because they are carrying the human capital, the lessons learned from the previous flip into the new project.
They are actively iterating on their own learned skills. But then you have the third structure, the project-based entrepreneur, which requires an entirely different kind of agility. Think of complex software architecture or Hollywood film production.
How does the real estate analogy apply to a film producer?
Well, a project-based entrepreneur is essentially building a fully functioning, massive city for a weekend festival and then tearing the entire thing down on Monday morning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They assemble a highly specialized temporary organization, achieve a singular, massive, objective-like shooting a blockbuster movie, rapidly disband the team, and then start from absolute zero, finding a new script and a new crew for the next project.
That sounds exhausting.
The network agility and reputation management required to continuously rebuild that city is just staggering.
But regardless of whether you are managing a master-planned community, flipping a house, or throwing a weekend festival, you hit the same undeniable wall. You need resources. You need capital, machinery, and distribution. And the sources point to a massive strategic friction here. How you acquire those resources permanently alters the trajectory of the business.
Right. Resources broadly split into two categories, tangible and intangible. Tangible resources are easily quantified on a balance sheet. Physical machinery, land, cash reserves, inventory.
The stuff you can touch.
Exactly. But the truly defensible moats of a business are often the intangible resources: brand reputation, institutional know-how, proprietary intellectual property, and those entrepreneurial networks we just discussed. And acquiring either requires capital.
Which forces founders into the great standoff. Venture capital versus bootstrapping. If a VC firm offers a founder $10 million to scale their startup, the mainstream narrative assumes the founder pops champagne and takes the check.
Of course, that's the dream, right?
Right. So why on earth would a rational person reject millions of dollars, max out their own personal credit cards, delay payments to vendors, and subject themselves to the agonizing grind of bootstrapping?
It comes down to a brutal, fundamental conflict of incentive models. An external investor, particularly a venture capital fund, operates on a very rigid mathematical timeline.
Because they have bosses too.
Exactly. They have their own limited partners to pay back. They require a massive return on their investment, typically within a 5 to 10-year window. Their entire operational mandate is to push the founder for rapid scaling and a high valuation exit, usually either an acquisition by a larger corporation or going public via an IPO.
They need the money multiplier to execute, regardless of whether that hypergrowth actually serves the core product.
Right. So if you are the social entrepreneur we discussed, or if your goal is to build a sustainable generational family business, taking VC money introduces a fatal systemic flaw.
You lose your mission.
You trade equity for capital, and equity is control. Once external investors hold board seats, their fiduciary duty is to maximize short-term shareholder returns.
So they can force your hand.
They can legally force you to abandon your philanthropic mission, compromise your product quality to hit quarterly targets, or simply fire you from your own company if you refuse to scale at their mandated pace.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's a literal battle for the soul of the enterprise. It's the ultimate speed versus control trade-off.
It is.
For many founders, retaining absolute governance over the vision and the underlying why of the company is worth enduring the financial suffocation of bootstrapping. You aren't just selling shares. You are potentially selling the very reason the company exists.
The control struggle is the invisible weight behind every entrepreneurial decision. It really is.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. What I want you, the listener, to take away from this exploration is that entrepreneurship is not a genetic trait reserved for a chosen few living in a specific tech hub.
Not at all.
Whether you are an entrepreneur fighting to optimize supply chains from inside a massive corporation, a project-based gig worker hustling in film production, or someone simply shifting your mindset to solve a logistical problem in your local community, it is fundamentally about how you choose to navigate true nation uncertainty. It's about recombining the resources around you under pressure to create value.
And the skill lies entirely in that recombination,
Right.
which actually leads to one final, wildly unexpected application from the research.
Oh, lay it on me.
In 2014, scholars published a study directly linking the mechanics of modern entrepreneurship to the history of sea piracy.
Wait, actual Golden Age pirates?
Actual pirates.
Okay.
The researchers suggested taking a strictly non-moral approach to historical piracy, using it as a literal blueprint for business model generation and entrepreneurship education today.
That is amazing.
Think about the mechanical parallels. Pirates operated in extreme nation uncertainty. They were highly project-based, rapidly recombining resources, often repurposing captured ships in completely novel ways.
And they had to manage incredibly complex, high-stakes teams in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly that. They engineered highly sophisticated equity and risk-sharing structures among their crews. To align incentives and prevent mutiny, they developed articles of agreement that dictated exactly how the spoils would be divided based on roles.
Wow.
And they even utilized the quartermaster as a democratic check against the captain's executive power.
So they were operating early, decentralized, autonomous organizations.
Basically, yeah.
So the ultimate archetype of the entrepreneur isn't the guy in the hoodie in the garage. The real archetype is Blackbeard engineering a complex equity split on a stolen galleon.
It certainly reframes the modern concept of a hostile takeover, doesn't it? I would invite you to mull over what today's agile startups and decentralized businesses might actually learn from the equity structures and risk mitigation of 18th century pirates navigating the high seas.
That is a phenomenal image to leave on. Next time you picture an entrepreneur, look past the Silicon Valley garage. Look for the forest fire making way for new growth. Look for the 45-year-old cynic carefully building systems to survive failure. Look for the person reaching into a dark jar of true uncertainty when everyone else runs away. And maybe, just maybe, look for a pirate ship on the horizon. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.